APTs and 0 days. When it comes to cybersecurity, that's what we really need to be focused on, right? Yeah, maybe not. I'm JB, this is Cyber Insight, and today we're going to be talking about a joint report that came out from CISA and the NSA that looked at organizations that have been compromised and kind of put together a top 10 of the most common cybersecurity misconfigurations that led to their breaches. So once you see this list, you might be surprised by some of the findings on there. You might also cry, depending upon your perspective. So we're going to do a deep dive into that. And I also want to mention, make sure you stick around to the end of the video. I do have a resource I'm going to share with you that if you start going down that path of making sure that you're taking care of these common misconfigurations, it can kind of help you out a little bit. So I'm going to hop over into my browser as we always do. And if you have any questions or comments as we move through this, please make sure you just drop them down in the comment section down below, and we'll kind of hit those up as we move through there. So here is the cybersecurity advisory that ended up coming out. I'm going to put a link for this in the video description so you can actually dig into this in a lot more depth if you want to. But just right off the top, pretty much this data here came from the NSA and CISA's red teams and blue teams, working together also with assessment teams through a whole bunch of different types of organizations. I believe it was FedCiv organizations and some commercial organizations. And they ended up putting together this list of the most common network and cybersecurity misconfigurations that led to these breaches. So just to give you to you right off the top, and then we're going to dig down into each one of these individually. We're looking at default configurations of software and applications, improper separation of privileges between regular users and administrators, insufficient network or insufficient internal network monitoring, network segmentation was missing, not doing patches or having a process for doing patches correctly, bypassing system access controls, weak or insufficient multi-factor authentication, insufficient access control lists on network shares and services, bad passwords, poor credential hygiene, and unrestricted code execution. If any of those look familiar to you, then you are not shocked at all by this report, and we've all run into different varying degrees and levels of these in different environments that we've worked in. But I think kind of just the bottom line takeaway right off the top is that the really, really simple things can lead to breaches that can have drastic negative impacts on organizations. And as they point out here, what that really illustrates is systematic weakness in a lot of organizations when it comes to security postures, the focus of teams, the focus of resources, how you go about making sure that a lot of these, what we would call foundational level things, are actually implemented in environments and that they're continued to be monitored to make sure that we're meeting what it is that we're saying that we're doing, but also monitoring to make sure that if something bad does happen somewhere in the environment, we're aware of when those changes are happening. The other thing that they kind of shift some of the blame here, or spread the blame, I should say, is also from the perspective of software manufacturers, hardware manufacturers, embracing a more secure by design type of outlook when it comes to building out tool sets that they're selling to customers. So some of this, is on us when we go and procure things and not going through the right processes to make sure that have some type of guidelines that we're aligning with and implementing and monitoring to make sure that we're doing that. And then part of it is on the folks that we're buying stuff from, that they could be doing a better job making these pieces of software, hardware be much more secure out of the box so that it isn't as much of a heavy resource intensive effort to get something up to a level where it's secure enough to be in an operational environment. So they also mentioned just a few high-level recommendations just right off the bat. So we'll hit these real quick and then dive into the specific findings. So getting rid of default credentials, hardening configurations, disabling unused services, implementing access controls, patching, shocking, right? Prioritizing your patching, right? So does it make sense to just be focused on the easy ones or the ones that are more critical? Or if something's critical on something that doesn't have internet access, is that as important as something that does have internet access and has a known vulnerability that actually has an exploit out there. Takes actually having a team that's able to look at those things and kind of do a little bit of risk assessment there. Reduce, restrict, audit, and monitor administrative accounts and privileges. A lot of people don't like to do that. Easier to just give somebody an account that has access to everything versus creating groups, scoping down privileges that are necessary to do what folks need to do. And then from the commercial side of things for vendors that are creating things, embedding security controls into product architecture from the start of development through the entire SDLC, eliminating default passwords, providing high quality audit logs at no extra charge. Ooh, I think is that a shot at cloud providers? I don't know. Mandating MFA, ideally phishing resistant. So maybe stuff not related to email and SMS for privileged users, and making MFA a default rather than an opt-in feature. That's pretty good. They also mentioned there's a PDF here. If you don't want to use the version that's on the website, you can go download that. So the thing that I really liked with this as we get into the technical details about all of the different common misconfigurations is that they tie it back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you aren't familiar with that, the MITRE ATT&CK framework kind of looks at tactics and techniques that adversaries use at different points in their process of going about finding out information about an organization, trying to get a foothold, getting persistence within there, exploiting different things, exfilling data. There's a whole bunch of different lanes and different types of tactics and procedures that an adversary would use. So it's kind of cool to see that they are taking these specific misconfigurations and aligning that back to a common taxonomy that we can use to kind of have a conversation amongst ourselves. So as I mentioned, where this data is coming from, so NSA, CISA, multiple teams, red team, blue team, also security assessments for those. So coming from DoD, Fed Civ branch, state, local, tribal, territorial, and the private sector. And they talk about a little bit about those different teams and how they go about doing that. Worth also mentioning that most of these environments have a heavy Windows and Active Directory services and infrastructure in there, which makes sense. So yeah, let's just get into this first one here and kind of talk through this a little bit. So default configurations of software and applications. So we're talking about default credentials and then also default service permissions and configuration settings. So it's like you get this piece of software or this device, it's going to have default credentials on it in some instances, which are easily Googleable, right? Googleable, is that even a word? You can easily Google these credentials out on the internet, right? So anybody who knows, okay, yes, this piece of software or this box is a Cisco firewall, what's the default credentials for that? They can go out and find that. Default service permissions configuration settings, right? That might have certain services automatically enabled on those boxes. So maybe HTTP or HTTPS or FTP or something like that is automatically enabled on this box or this application that then has a connection to the internet. You put it in, you start doing the stuff you're doing, you don't go back, you don't harden things. And next thing you know, you have a service that's exposed to the internet, potentially with default credentials and default services, and then someone is able to easily get in there and compromise stuff. You aren't necessarily making it too hard, and you probably aren't applying some type of network access controls for the management interface, which is going to be another finding later on down in the report. Let's see what else they have here for default credentials. So as I mentioned, finding credentials is a simple web search. Then resetting the built-in administrative credentials via predictable forgotten password questions, right? So that's another thing. Default VPN credentials, public keys available to set up things. That's always a risk. Potentially leveraging default credentials on software deployment tools for code execution, lateral movement, right? That's the big one. If it's a tool set that has the ability to reach out and get to other things, then not only did you just potentially lose that particular host, that now has a foothold to be able to go and make configuration changes on other things. Then I think they kind of dive in a little bit here into other types of IoT devices. The challenge with those is, first off, obviously they have default credentials that are on those. The software, the the life cycle for patching those types of devices normally is a lot slower. Um, so that's always kind of a risk as well. Maybe we'll hit that once we get down to the patching section. But depending on what things there have access to the internet, uh, which hopefully they don't, but depending on what it is, you just want to be aware of what you're putting where and what has access to what. They say further compounding problems here is printers and scanners may have privileged domain accounts loaded so that users can easily scan documents and upload them to a shared drive or email them, right? So yeah, you're kind of doubling down there if you end up having service accounts or other types of accounts that are locally stored on there that might have the ability to get in there and then do more damage across the network if they can move laterally. So default service permissions and configuration settings. Here's a few of the ones that they ran into quite a bit. Insecure Active Directory certificate services, insecure legacy protocols and services, and insecure SMB service. Yeah, that one will get people pretty good. So with the ADCS, which is used for PKI or public key infrastructure certificates and Active Directory environment, there's some templates that are there that are used to build certificates for different types of servers and other entities in the organization. So these can be exploited to manipulate the certificate infrastructure into issuing fraudulent certificates and or escalate user privileges to domain admin privileges. So you have to be careful with that and how things are configured there. So a few things configuration-wise or misconfiguration-wise that could lead to those types of risks is ADCS server running with web enrollment enabled. So what that potentially does is allow an unauthenticated actor to communicate with the server to authenticate to an actor-controlled computer, which then can relay the authentication to the ADCS web enrollment service and obtain a certificate for the server's account. So with this, it kind of allows the fraudulent server to potentially use man-in-the-middle techniques to masquerade as a trusted entity on the network. You also can get into some Kerberos badness there, being able to obtain a TGT or Kerberos ticket granting ticket, which they can use to compromise the server, and usually from there you can do a whole bunch of other badness. So definitely need to watch out for that. Another thing with the ADCS is looking at areas where low privilege users have enrollment rights, and then via that type of misconfiguration, they can use a low privilege account to request a certificate with a particular subject alternative name and gain a certificate that actually matches a user principal name, a UPN of a privileged account, and then with that, they can pretty much impersonate that account. Insecure legacy protocols and services. Again, this one here, it just comes back to what type of hardening are you doing on services, or I should say on operating systems, to ensure that legacy protocols are turned off. And if they aren't able to be turned off for some reason, you really need to do a good job of containing those services in a way where other things have very, very limited access to it. And if you can't do that, or I should say, in addition to that, you also should make sure that you have a proper amount of monitoring for anything related to that service, traffic going to and from it, different types of actions that are happening, so that you have a good idea if there's a potential of things happening that shouldn't be happening. So they talk a little bit about LLMNR and NetBIOS. So if you can spoof an authoritative source for name resolution on a target network by responding to passing traffic, effectively poisoning the service so that the target computers will communicate with the malicious system instead of the intended one. So again, these are things that you can disable in your environment, and you should. As I mentioned, SMB, yeah, this one will get people a lot, especially some environments, depending upon like the SANs that they're using and other types of things that require SMB. file shares. Yeah, this one could be a doozy, and this is normally one of the ones that, depending upon what's using it, it can be kind of hard to move away from it, and you definitely need to move to a more secure version of that. So SMB, or server message block, is a service in Windows component primarily for file sharing. Its default configuration, including the latest version of Windows, does not require signing network messages to ensure authenticity and integrity. If SMB servers do not enforce SMB signing, malicious actors can use a man-in-the-middle technique such as NTLM relay. So further, malicious actors can combine a lack of SMB signing with a name resolution poisoning that was mentioned up above here in the insecure legacy and protocols and services to gain access to remote systems without needing to capture or crack any hashes. So SMB signing, definitely want to make sure that you're doing that, and definitely want to make sure that you're using a secure version of SMB. So that means no SMB v1, v2, all that good stuff. All right, moving on to the second one. If you have any questions, throw those in the comment section. We're gonna press on here. Improper separation of admin and user privileges. Right, so this could be something where instead of having a user account and an admin account, you just have one account, and everything that you're doing on that box, especially if we're talking about from a Windows perspective, is in essence being run with elevated privileges, right? And that's really, really bad, especially if that box has access to the internet and you're hypothetically, I don't know, getting email on that box and clicking on links that you shouldn't be clicking on, and then a whole bunch of bad stuff can happen. So here they're talking about accounts having a wide range of devices and services, allowing malicious actors to move through the network quickly with one compromised account without triggering lateral movement or privilege escalation detection measures, right? So if the account is supposed to be allowed to do a whole bunch of different things, it becomes compromised and starts doing a whole bunch of things, that might not necessarily set off flags. Although I would still argue, depending upon what type of actions are being done, even folks with domain admins or enterprise admins, you should have some type of notification or alerting depending on certain types of activities. So common account separation misconfigurations. Giving an account overly excessive privileges, right? So maybe the account needs to have access to configure network devices, right? So we're in an Active Directory environment. We have users that are network admins. Instead of creating a group that's specifically for network admins, assigning that particular user account to that group, you end up putting it also in the domain admins group. And now someone who doesn't actually need domain admin privileges does, right? And so it's kind of privilege creep, I guess, would be a way to look at it. Elevated service account permission. So service accounts, normally we use those if an application or something like that needs to be able to interact with different services or other applications or Active Directory, whatever it might be. There might be reasons why a service or application needs to do something, and it will normally need a service account to be able to do that. Again, we want to make sure that we're being very granular with what that is allowed to do and what it needs to do. Don't want to be giving it domain admin privileges if it just needs to be doing lookups against Active Directory, right? Something simple as that. So yeah, want to make sure that we're controlling that. And then non-essential use of elevated accounts. That actually goes back to what I was talking about. You only have one account, it has domain admin, and you are surfing the internet or checking your email or whatever. That can lead to some bad stuff because that account has elevated privileges by default right there with whatever you're doing. And then they're going to kind of go through all of these things, but I think I kind of talked through all of this without us really needing to do that too much. So let's see if there's anything. Applications often operate using user accounts to access resource. Service accounts, want to make sure that they have the right things. They can be exploited if they have elevated privileges to gain access to things that they shouldn't have access to. Due to these factors, Kerber roasting, a form of credential access achieved by cracking a service account credentials, is a common technique. And again, if you want to dive a little bit more into these, go click on these and go back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework where they kind of detail out these specific tactics. Non-essential use of elevated accounts. Obviously, malicious actors want to prioritize getting accounts that have the highest level of privileges, because with that, they're able to do the most amount of damage across environment. So they definitely go after target elevated accounts. Obtaining initial access via an account with administrative permissions, an assessment team compromised a domain in under a business day. Yeah, I mean, once you have domain admin, you can pretty much do everything that you need to do. Although it's good to mention, like, domain admin might not necessarily be the most important thing in the environment. Like, there's other crown jewels, there's other data that's more important than just getting domain admin. But in a lot of cases, if you're able to get domain admin, you're able to get to whatever that other goal is that you have in the environment. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because I love network monitoring. Network monitoring is great. You're able to see, it's the only thing where you're able to really see everything that's happening in an environment, right? We can put monitoring on applications, we can put monitoring on Active Directory, we can put monitoring on, other specific things. But network monitoring allows us to see everything that's happening in the environment as long as we're doing it at the right places within the architecture. So here they're talking about some organizations do not optimally configure host and network sensors for traffic collection and end host logging. These insufficient configurations could lead to undetected adversarial compromise, right? So we want to make sure that we're capturing stuff going what they call north and south. So that's within the environment, going out to the internet or out to the cloud or out to other sites. That's north and south. And then east and west traffic is what we would count traffic that's happening kind of within the data center, within the environment. And it's important to get all of that, right? North-south to the internet should be prioritized as the first thing, but east-west will give you a lot of other information, especially if you're trying to track back to see how an attack might have happened within an environment and where it went. So here they talk about improper sensor configuration limit for the traffic collection capability needed for enhanced baseline development and detract from timely detection of anomalous activity, right? So you got to make sure that you're in the right places and you have the capability to handle the traffic that you need, as well as hold it for a long enough period of time, right? If your sensor is only able to hold a day's worth of data and it keeps overwriting, then that probably is not going to be providing you too much value unless that data is being sent off somewhere to a SIM or a SOAR or something like that, that is processing it and doing something else with the data or metadata. And here they talk about exploit insufficient monitoring to gain access to networks. Assessment team observed an organization with host-based monitoring, but no network monitoring. You see this quite a bit. Host-based monitoring informs defensive teams about adverse activities on singular hosts, and network monitoring informs about adverse activities traversing all the hosts. In this example, the organization could identify infected hosts, but could not identify where the infection was coming from, right? So what I was talking about, making sure that you're seeing what's going on north to south, out to the internet. And thus could not stop future lateral movement. If you don't know where it's coming from, you can't put any blocks in your firewall or trace back the data flow to see how things are coming in. Another one here, assessment team gained persistent deep access with an organization that had a mature cyber posture. The organization did not detect the assessment team's lateral movement, persistence, and C2 activity, command and control. Right, so that's traffic that they're sending to the box that's been compromised that they have persistence on. That's how they're getting back and forth and sending data to be able to further get into the environment or pull data out, including when the team attempted noisy activity to trigger security responses. So not only is it good to have the ability to look for traffic going in and out of the environment, so something like Zeek, Corelight, something along those lines, do a good job of capturing that. Security Onion, I believe, has Zeek as well, so you could use that. And then also having something to look for C2 traffic, so different types of anomalous traffic. You might need something that does some machine learning or something like that. There's some free tools out there like Rita does a pretty good job with that. I think Splunk has some stuff that can do that as well. But yeah, definitely you want to make sure that you're monitoring and looking for different things to kind of stick out. The next one, if number 3 is one of my favorite things to talk about, number 4 is my most favorite thing to talk about, and that is lack of network segmentation. So network segmentation, we're talking about breaking up the network into different specific areas that should be related to the function of those services, right? And a lot of times what we see is no network segmentation, right? So to give you an example, what we would want to see is workstations in its own subnet and VLAN, domain controllers in its own subnet and VLAN, your file shares in its own subnet and VLAN, your printers in its own subnet and VLAN, your databases in their own subnet and VLAN, your Windows patching tools in their own subnet and VLAN. And by doing that and breaking it up that way, it then enables you to do a better job of implementing access controls within those particular groups, both for traffic that's happening within that particular subnet or VLAN, but also data flows going back and forth from one subnet or VLAN to another one. And once you kind of do that and you have an understanding of the data flows that are necessary within your environment, you're able to cut down a lot of traffic. And honestly, that will stop a lot of lateral movement potentially within an environment if you do that. A lot of places don't do that. It's a lot of work to get to that point, but you definitely want to spend the time doing that. Something else that we're kind of seeing a little bit of a move to is micro-segmentation. That's where we're kind of able to do that using other types of grouping and maybe agents or different types of software to kind of group hosts together. Maybe not necessarily by VLAN or subnet. That's definitely another route that you can go. Me personally, I like defense in depth, so I like to do things at the VLAN level, within the VLAN, at the firewall level, and then also at the host level. So you can use host-based firewalls or other types of access controls on the host. So let's see what else to hit on here. Insufficient network segmentation allows actors to compromise a resource to move laterally across to a whole bunch of different stuff, like I said. Yeah, where you see folks get blown up a lot by that is ransomware attacks and post-exploitation techniques, because once you get a foothold, if there's no segmentation and access control listed with that segmentation, there's nothing there to stop things from communicating with each other, at least from the network layer. There might be other types of protection mechanisms on the individual hosts, but that isn't necessarily always a given, and depending upon what's going on and what services they're exploiting, then that might not really matter too much. A lack of segmentation between IT and OT environments, operational technology, places OT environments at risk. For example, assessments teams have gained access to OT networks despite prior assurance that the networks were fully air-gapped, right? So that might be stuff dealing with power companies and other types of systems that are supposed to be completely separate from your normal IP IT networks. And then a lot of times people forget that there's a connection somewhere, and then that can do some real damage depending upon the type of organization that's being attacked. All right, number 5, poor patch management. So vendors release patches and updates to address security vulnerabilities. Depending upon what it is, those can be frequent or they can be infrequent. For most operating systems, we're going to see those pretty frequently. For hardware appliances, a little less frequently, but still normally pretty good. We're talking our routers, switches, firewalls, things like that. Other types of IoT devices, not as often as should be. Same with printers, that can take a while. Poor patch management and network hygiene practices are often enable adversaries to discover open attack vectors and exploit critical vulnerabilities. So we're talking about not having regular patching cycles and use of unsupported operating systems and outdated firmware. Yeah, there's a lot to take into account here, and this is probably, when it comes to getting an environment to be moving in the right direction of becoming secure, this is probably one of the first things that you want to go after. Probably like asset identification. You need to know what's in the environment first. and then make sure that you're hitting patches, and figuring out a way to patch regularly. Hopefully being able to do some type of testing. If you don't have a test environment, you have a subset of hosts that you push patches first to make sure that it doesn't blow anything up. And then if you have something that has an unsupported operating system on it, what's the reason for that? Is it something, is it a budget constraint which isn't allowing you to upgrade? Is it a resource constraint? Is it you just don't know that they're out of date? Because if you aren't doing patch management, you're probably not doing vulnerability management. So maybe you just don't even know that the operating system or the firmware is out of date. So a whole bunch of different things there that can be pretty bad, but at the same time, definitely one of the things that you want to tackle first as far as taking care of that. So here they kind of give a little bit of a breakdown. It's funny because from a attacker perspective, vulnerability scanning is a pretty easy way of enumeration to figure out what something is there, especially if it's open up to the internet. You can figure out what something's running and go do a check to see if there's any vulnerabilities, especially any type of like remote code execution that's available for that. And yeah, I think that's kind of what they're talking about here. The assessment teams observed threat actors exploiting CVEs in public-facing applications. So you have something that's connected to the internet, doesn't have good access control mechanisms on it, and it's not patched. Depending upon the vulnerability, it could be popped and then could become a point for an attacker to get foothold in the environment and then pivot from there. And chances are, if your patch management is poor on certain things that are attached to the internet, your patch management is probably not all that great for a lot of other stuff in your environment. Use of unsupported OSS operating systems and firmware. This kind of goes back to like the outdated services and things like that. Sometimes there's a reason why it is that way and you can't necessarily move away from it. Yet, if that's the case, you need to make sure that you're spending extra attention on monitoring what that is, the connections that are going to that. You have to try to harden it as much as you can in other ways if it's going to be something that's going to be persisting in your environment until you're able to move on from that. Bypass of system access controls. A malicious actor can bypass system access controls by compromising alternative authentication mechanisms in the environment. So we're talking about if an attacker can collect hashes in a network, they can use the hashes to authenticate using non-standard means such as pass to hash. By mimicking accounts without the clear text password, an actor can expand and fortify their access without detection. Kerber roasting, and we talked about that further up, is one of the most time-efficient ways to elevate privileges and move laterally throughout an organization. So if an attacker can get access to a box and that box has hashes on it, then if they have the right amount of time and the passwords that were used to create those hashes are weak, you have the potential of this being a way to get access to things within the environment. Weak or misconfigured MFA methods. So misconfigured smart cards or tokens. So talking about multi-factor requirements can be misconfigured so that the password hashes for accounts never change. Even though the password itself is no longer used because a smart card or token is required instead, there's still a password hash for the account that can be used as an alternative credential for authentication. If the password hash never changes once a malicious actor has the account's password hash, the actor can use it indefinitely via the pass the hash technique as long as that account still exists. Right? So you want to make sure that that is not misconfigured to not continue to force the user to update their passwords. Lack of phishing resistant MFA. So we were talking about, I think we mentioned this before, SIM swapping, SMS, even email in some ways. These are things that are a little bit more easily exploitable than something that is using like a hardware token. Here they're talking about voice phishing to convince the user to provide missing MFA information. So that another way. I mean, that's kind of exploiting a person, but yeah, same type of issue there. Insufficient ACLs on network shares and services. Data shares and repositories are primary targets for malicious actors. Network administrators may improperly configure ACLs to allow for unauthorized access. User access is sensitive or administrative data on shares. So I'm going to take this a step further. So we're talking about data on shares and not locking that down with permissions. We can also apply the same to services, especially within the cloud. We also can talk about other types of ACLs on the network as well. Same type of idea. Do you want everything to be able to talk with everything? No. Having an idea of who should be able to communicate with what, whether it's a user getting access to certain type of data or files, or a device being able to talk to all devices or only to specific devices that it's necessary to. These are things that you want to look at and make sure that they are configured and hardened. Poor credential hygiene, number 9. So in obtaining credentials for initial access, persistence, and lateral movement, the other follow-on activity, especially in phishing-resistant MFA, is not enabled. Poor credential hygiene includes easily crackable passwords, like password 123, or clear password disclosure. So easily crackable passwords are ones that can be guessed using computational services in a very small period of time. Easily crackable passwords on network generally stem from a lack of password length and randomness and complexity. So shorter than 15 characters, and something that is probably using dictionary names or things like that. So not just random characters, which is why randomly generated passwords using a password manager is probably the way to go when it comes to that. This is often due to lax requirements for passwords and organizational policy and user training. Policy that only requires short and simple passwords leaves user passwords susceptible to password cracking. Organizations should provide or allow users or allow employees use of password managers, to enable the generation of ease of use. Easy use? There we go. Of secure random passwords for each account. Often when a credential is obtained, it's a hash of the password and not the password itself. Although some hashes can be used directly for pass-to-hash techniques, many hashes need to be cracked to obtain the usable credentials. The cracking process takes a captured hash of a user's plaintext password and leverages dictionary word lists and rule sets, which can take quite a bit of time the longer the password is. I'm going to talk about some standard tools. Hashcat is one. If you've watched any of my Try Hack Me labs, we've used different password cracking software before. Let's see, crack the password hashes for NTLM users, Kerberos service tickets, NTLM version 2, and PFX stores. Yeah, all right. And clear text password disclosure. Storing passwords in clear text is a serious security risk. So this one you're going to see with administrators a lot, sometimes. And that is they take their password, they put it in a text file called passwords.txt. They leave it on their desktop, or file share, even worse, that everyone has access to. And all it takes is a user with lower privileges who gets compromised, has access to a file share. The attacker looks through the file share, finds the password.txt file. Yeah, all bad. Or even if we look at it from like a cloud perspective, they put it up on an S3 bucket. That happens a lot. I mean, there's tools out there to literally go and search S3 buckets for passwords and account type of information. So not good at all. And the last one here, number 10, unrestricted code execution. So unverified programs are allowed to execute on hosts. A threat actor can run arbitrary malicious payloads within the network. So malicious actors can often execute code after gaining initial access to a system. For example, after a user falls for a phishing scam, the actor usually convinces the victim to run a code on their workstation to gain remote access to the internal network. This is usually an unverified program that has no legitimate purpose or business reason. whole bunch of different things here. So the account that gets hacked, if it has administrative privileges, and that's one avenue that you could end up going there, you should have some type of software that is limiting applications being allowed to be installed and ran on the application. Uh, Windows has App Locker. You can go ahead, you can configure that. Takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of effort, but it at least will stop, a lot of things from just being able to be run automatically. There's other agents and software that can do similar things, but you want to make sure that you have and generate an allow list of the software that should be able to be run in your environment. And if it's not on there, then it should block it and generate an alert. Same thing with drivers and things like that. All right, now this is to the end of what we're going to cover today. If enough people appreciate this, I mean, who am I kidding? I'm going to do another video anyway, and we're going to talk about mitigations for all these different things. It's just I didn't want to turn this into a 2-hour video. 45 minutes or whatever it is now is long enough. If you stuck around to the end here, I did say that I was going to share something for you. I created this infographic that looks at and identifies the top 10 cybersecurity misconfigurations. Take this, print this out, put this on your wall, take the report from CISA, get it in PDF format. You got both of these things. You can go, you can talk to your bosses, you can go talk to, whoever your team leads are. Be like, hey, this is some stuff we want to make sure that we're handling, aware of, and taking care of. So if that is it, and nobody has any other questions, we can go ahead and wrap this up. Appreciate everybody for dropping in. Make sure you smash the like button if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Do that too. I appreciate it. Go have a good week, and we will talk soon. All right, bye.